Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Cochlone and I'm the new Executive Director of the Shenandoah National Park Trust. And I want to welcome all of you to our second virtual field trip for National Park Week. I hope that you have been enjoying the diverse array of programs this week that celebrate and highlight the wonders of our national park. As many of you know, our mission is to invest in programs and initiatives which help ensure the Shenandoah National Park remains the crown jewel of the Park Service, an economic driver for the region, and a national treasure for all to enjoy for generations to come. We live our mission by protecting the wildlife and wildlands of the park, creating today and tomorrow's environmental stewards through a variety of educational programs, preservation of natural and historical resources, and enhancing the work of the park through scientific research and professional development for park staff. Programs such as invasive species management are critical to ensuring that the Shenandoah National Park remains resilient in the face of climate change. And this program is only made possible by many of the Trust supporters, so thank you. And now I'd like to take this moment to introduce Pat Kinney, our Superintendent of the Shenandoah National Park.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to join you here on the 51st anniversary of Earth Day, and in the midst of National Park Week. So National Park Week celebrates our national parks, and I emphasize that they belong to us, all of us as citizens of the United States. These are our parks to use and enjoy and visit. But they do have issues, and you're going to hear about some of those issues today when we talk about invasive species. But I think, think about the National Park Service. 1872, this country created Yellowstone National Park. It was the first national park of the world. Today, the national park system encompasses 423 units. It is scattered all over the United States. All 50 states and the U.S. territories all have parks in them. We protect grand landscapes like the Grand Canyon in Yosemite and Yellowstone. We protect Gettysburg and Cedar Creek, Belle Grove, historic sites that tells the history of this country. We protect memorials like the National Mall and all the monuments on the mall. We protect Mount Rushmore National Memorial. So the national park, and we tell stories, key points in time, like Selma to Montgomery, the March to Selma to Montgomery, the Martin Luther King site. So the National Park Service tells and protects our heritage, and National Park Week was set up to ensure that we celebrate this for this week. Today we're going to talk about invasive species. Invasive species are a challenge as a natural resource manager in a spectacular landscape like Shenandoah National Park. We've documented over 350 species of non-native plants within this landscape, and we are actively managing over 60 of those species. We couldn't do this work. It would be very difficult to do this work. We're able to accomplish much more through the efforts of the Shenandoah National Park Service Trust, that the Shenandoah National Park Trust, sorry, too many words there. But they are an amazing partner. Their philanthropic efforts help us do more to restore the native forest through the eradication of non-natives and the planting and replacement with native species. These are great efforts, and you're going to learn a lot about them today from experts, true experts, not like myself. But so with that, I will stop. I just want to say thank you again. I want to say thank you to the Trust for your continued support, and for all of you that are here today that might support the Trust. Thank you very much. Again, this work is really critical. So I'm going to turn it over to Jake Hughes. Jake is the Program Manager for Invasive Species and Vegetation Restoration here at the park. Jake's a great team member of this park. He's a real expert in this arena. He comes to this park. He's been at this park for since 2005, dedicating his efforts to restoring forests and native landscapes. So with that, I'll turn it to you, Jake. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Pat. So let me do my screen sharing here. Let's see, 1 second. Let's start my PowerPoint. All right. Okay. So so I'm gonna talk to you guys a little bit about the invasive species problem, and then talk some about how we're dealing with this specific problem in Shenandoah National Park. And I'll be highlighting some of the ways that the trust has been helping us. The Shenandoah National Park Trust has been helping us all along the way. So, all right, so start off with a definition here. For our intents and purposes, an invasive species is a species that has evolved somewhere else. So it's non-native. It's been introduced by people either intentionally or accidentally, and it causes one or more problems. And it's important to point out that non-native does not equal invasive. There are many non-native species that are of no consequence for park resources. Things like dandelions, shown here on the screen, apple trees, they really don't cause any problems for park resources. They're harmless non-native species. This beast, on the other hand, this is myelominate. This is a true invasive species. This stuff in this forest opening here overruns everything in its path, just shades out any tree seedlings that try to establish, just kind of bulldozes the landscape. So this is a true invasive plant, and a non-native that's truly invasive. All right, so what kinds of problems do these invasive plants cause? Well, as you can probably imagine from the photo of the last species of myelominate, they displace, they crowd out native species. Some of them interbreed with, hybridize with native species. Some ruin habitat for animals, for wildlife, for other species. Some even alter processes like fire. They may make fire more frequent, or in some cases even less frequent. And some even alter the environment in which they grow, causing changes in things like soil properties, changing the pH or levels of certain nutrients in the soil. So let's look at a few examples of these taken from Shenandoah. All right, this guy here, garlic mustard. It's a very conspicuous non-native right now because it's flowering, and this species is known to cause problems such as inhibiting the growth of beneficial fungi that a lot of plants depend on, and it's also a problem for this little guy in this slide here. This is a rare butterfly in our region called the West Virginia white butterfly, and this rare butterfly feeds on native relatives of garlic mustard called toothworts, and it feeds on toothworts as a caterpillar. So adult butterflies will come along and they'll lay eggs on a toothwort plant, and the eggs will hatch, and the caterpillar will begin feeding on toothworts and develop through the life cycle. Well, garlic mustard is chemically similar enough to toothworts that the adult butterflies are often tricked into laying eggs on garlic mustard. Unfortunately, when those eggs hatch out, the caterpillars can't metabolize garlic mustard, and they end up dying on garlic mustard plants. So in a place where you have a lot more garlic mustard than toothworts, this can be a real problem for this rare butterfly. Another well-known invasive species here. This is stilt grass. It's basically everything green in the in the lower 2/3 of the screen there, and this invasive grass can cause all kinds of problems. Obviously, it can crowd out co-op space from native species. It can stifle tree seedling establishment. So it can affect forest development. It can alter soil pH, raise the soil pH, making soils more favorable for itself and other species, and less so for more acid-loving native species. And it can even alter bug communities. It's been found that predatory bugs like spiders are much less common in stands of stilt grass, and this can cause surges in herbivore plant-eating bugs. And you'll often see the results of this when you see plants that are struggling to grow in stands of stilt grass that are all chewed up by all these plant-eating bugs that are free from the predation that they might suffer from things like spiders if the stilt grass weren't there. One more of my favorites here from Shenandoah. This is Oriental Bittersweet, a climbing, twining vine that can just scramble over everything in its path. This forest opening here, you can kind of make it out growing over all the little trees and shrubs that are trying to get established in there. So it can really put a stop to forest succession, forest development. And it can also hybridize with an uncommon native species in our region called American Bittersweet. And apparently the hybrids of these two species is actually more aggressive, more rampant than faster growing than either of the parent species, which is kind of annoying. All right, so a little bit about the situation here in Shenandoah. In terms of plant species in the park, as the superintendent mentioned, we've documented just over 1,400 vascular plant species or higher plant species in the park, and of those, about 3/4 are native species. And the remaining 25% or so, the remaining quarter, are non-natives that have evolved elsewhere. And of those 370 or so non-natives, 63 are either invasive or potentially invasive species. So in terms of the total number of plant species in the park, the number isn't huge. It's around 4% of all of our species in the park. Now, how prevalent are these invasive species in the park? Well, that's a bit of a different story. Now, this is some data from our forest monitoring program, and this down at the bottom of this graph, you see that it shows the proportion of plots that each of the listed invasive species here is found in, and you can think about this as the proportion of the park. So a few of these species on this list, like mile-a-minute, are barely detectable in the data set, but some are abundant enough that they're found in upwards of 30, 40, even approaching 50% of the plots or 50% of the park. And in fact, one or more invasive plant has been found in just over 60% of the plots sampled. So how do we deal with the situation like this huge and growing, no pun intended, problem here in the park? Well, we've developed a four-faceted strategy that involves prevention, early detection, rapid response, control of established invasives, and then restoration, vegetation restoration. And I'll go through these each, and all along the way, the Shenandoah National Park Trust has been a huge help with our management strategy and approach to invasive plants. So prevention, if you can keep them from establishing in the first place, that's going to get you your best bang for your buck. If you can keep those weeds from ever taking root in the park in the first place, that's what you want to do. And often that just involves cleaning stuff, cleaning boot treads before you head down a trail, cleaning equipment, or making sure equipment is clean before it comes into the park or before it's moved from one location in the park to another. Getting those seeds and the soil that may contain seeds off of those things before they're moved around. It also involves education, and we've got good information on our website about invasive plants, invasive species, and we do presentations like this, and this is one area where the Blue Ridge PRISM, which you'll hear about in a few minutes from Beth, has been a huge help to us. They are doing such great public education, doing all kinds of workshops and presentations every year. And the Shenandoah National Park Trust has helped support the PRISM, particularly in the early years when the PRISM was just getting established. So the trust and the PRISM are really helping us with our prevention efforts. Often you can't prevent them from getting established. You know, they'll find their way in and show up. And so if an invasive species does get established in the park, you want to get it before it's everywhere, before it's widespread. And what I'm showing here is an idealized invasion curve. It's basically the abundance of an invasive over time. And often when an invasive species establishes, there's what's called a lag phase or a lag period, where the invasive is present at a relatively low level before it begins to increase in abundance and become often rapidly increase to an abundant state. And if you can get in there during that lag phase, when the species is uncommon, and knock it out before it's everywhere, obviously that's the way to go with management. Every year, every couple of years, it seems like we find another new non-native, another invasive that we didn't realize that we had in the park. A couple of years ago, it was this thorny, nasty shrub that showed up at the north end of the park, that we found up in the north end of the park near Front Royal. And we're dealing with it. It's the only place, or one of two places now, where we know we have it. But you know, like I say, every year or two, we turn up another one of these. And to do it effectively, you need a list of likely suspects, species that are likely to show up, and you also need need to know where to look, where the species is likely to establish. And you also got to get out there and do the surveys. And we have the first two components. You know, we have the lists and we have the maps of likely establishment points. But what we didn't have until this year is a whole lot of resources to do the surveys. And the trust has helped us this year and next with some seasonal staff support to do more surveys for early detection species. And so I think that's really going to help us a lot. If anybody out there is interested in checking out some of the species on the list, you can go to inaturalist.org and check out the Shenandoah Early Detection Invasive Plants Field Guide. If you just search for that in there, you can turn up our current list of early detection species. All right, well, you know, on occasion, the species will get away from us, and it'll become abundant enough that we can't knock it out, can't clear the park of it. And there are a few species, things like Tree of Heaven, that were well established even before anybody even thought about invasives control. And for those dozen or so species in the park, we have to be really strategic about how we approach the situation. We have to set our priorities in terms of where we work. We have to make sure that we're prioritizing the species and going after the species that are causing the biggest problems. We want to have best management practices that aren't causing more problems than they're solving. And we want to get out there and monitor to make sure that we're not only dealing with the problem, but more importantly, we're getting a good recovery of native species or through restoration. We're doing that. Our site prioritization in dealing with these established invasives is often based on the presence of rare communities or rare plant populations. We're often trying to create a buffer a population of a species like this swordleaf phlox that's on the left here, or the American fly honeysuckle that's shown here on the right, in the right panel. So we're trying to keep the species like mile-a-minute from overrunning populations of these rare species. In terms of prioritizing the species we target, again, we want to be going after the species that are causing the real problems. And that may change over time as more and more research is done. As we learn more about these invasives, we might find out that, well, species isn't maybe causing the problems we thought it was. So we want to make sure we're targeting the species that are really causing the problems for resources, things like this stilt grass shown in the photo here. And when we deal with these species, like I mentioned, we want to have best management practices that aren't killing off the natives that are still surviving in these seas of invasive species that aren't causing damage, harm to the environment. And we want to monitor our efforts. So we want to get out there with plots and repeat photography and make sure that we're affecting the change that we want. And hopefully, when we treat a stand of stilt grass like that, we're getting a change as shown here. This is that same spot, free of stilt grass, with a lot of native species growing in it. Just a lot more structure than was shown in the last slide, and that's what we're striving for. Now, sometimes the regeneration of native species from the seed bank or from the surrounding forest isn't what we want. So we have to go in and we have to do active restoration, and that's the fourth facet of our strategy. And it's a park service policy to use locally native plant materials. So we collect seed from as close as possible to their site being restored, and either use those seeds or use those seeds to grow plants that are used in a restoration effort. And so we have a small nursery at park headquarters where we do some of this plant propagation, and the trust has been a huge help here with this effort. They've funded a lot of the materials that we needed to get this effort started. They've also over the past several years funded a volunteer leader that's been a huge help with leading all the volunteers that have helped us with collecting seed and potting up plants and planting plants out in the field. So yet again, trust has been there helping us out. All right, well, that's a little bit about the park situation and a little bit of background on invasive species. I think I should probably stop there and turn it over to Beth Mizell, who's the program director for the Blue Ridge PRISM, our great partner. And she'll be telling you about the PRISM and some about what you guys can do to help with the invasive species problem. And I'll be happy to take questions at the end, but I'll turn it over to Beth right now. So Beth, take it away.
Thank you, Jake. Can you unshare your screen? Thank you. All right, give me just a second to get my presentation queued up here. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me today. And so Jake gave you a really nice overview of the invasive plants at Shenandoah National Park. I was astounded with Pat's revelation that there were 350 non-native plant species and 60 of them are managed on the park. I did not know that. That was quite astounding. So I'm going to talk to you today about Blue Ridge PRISM. And so I'll introduce you to Blue Ridge PRISM, or Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. PRISM was founded in 2014 by Rod and Maggie Walker, working with Jake Hughes at the park. Rod and Maggie discovered acres of invasive bittersweet on their property adjacent to the park and connected with Jake to figure out what to do about it. And the rest is history. Most CWMAs around the country are led by public and private land management agencies. Blue Ridge PRISM is unique in that this CWMA, or Cooperative Weed Management Area, was founded and is led by private landowners and volunteers. Blue Ridge PRISM became a project of the Shenandoah National Park Trust. And in 2020, PRISM grew up and we took the big step of becoming our own 501c3 public charity and count the trust as a huge partner as the park. A little bit more about PRISM and the area that we cover. So our mission is to reduce the impact of invasive species in the northern Blue Ridge Mountains. And we cover 10 counties: Clark, Warren, Rappahannock, Page, Rockingham, Augusta, Madison, Greene, Albemarle, including Charlottesville and Nelson. We're the only PRISM in Virginia, and we often work at a broader level to address the threat of invasive species statewide. We cover, as I mentioned, the 10 counties, almost 3 million acres, including the 200,000 acre national park, roughly 50,000 landowners with 5 acres or more. Huge territory. So after listening to Jake's talk, you may be thinking, this seems like a big problem. What can I do? And it may even seem overwhelming, like getting you down. But first, so we'll break this down. So first, you learn to identify invasive plants and learn how to control them to the best of ability on your property. And you are doing that just by attending this presentation. And that's a great start because there are a lot of invasive plants. Like Jake didn't even touch on the 60 invasive plants that they control in the park. And I won't even touch on all the invasive plants that are present in Virginia. So to learn more about invasive plants, Blue Ridge PRISM offers invasive plants workshops throughout the year. And I'll make a plug for our next workshops, our summer series. They will start in May. So we have events on May 26th, June 14th, and June 24th. You can visit our website for registration details, www.blueridgeprism.org. You will learn how to manage invasive plants that are best managed and identified during the summer. So you'll learn how to identify some invasive plants, which ones you can treat now, which ones you should treat later, best seasonal practices, how to use manual and mechanical control techniques, how to use herbicide control techniques, so choosing the right herbicide and equipment and using it properly, and then helping you to plan some of your invasive control projects, especially if you have multiple plants that you're dealing with. So speaking of our website, I just wanted to take a minute to highlight some of the resources that Blue Ridge PRISM offers. Of particular usefulness are our fact sheets. And I'll show you an example of that. So we have 14 invasive plant fact sheets that are focused on invasives, and they're available for download from our website. Here's an example of that for garlic mustard. And Jake showed some nice pictures of garlic mustard and the West Virginia white in his presentation. Each of these fact sheets are chock full of details on a plant's natural history, identification, and control. And hard copies are available from Blue Ridge PRISM at no charge. And you can reach out to us and make the request, and I'm happy to drop them in the mail to you. And I also want to give you some additional resources. So we offer presentations like this to interested groups like HOAs, garden clubs, master naturalists, master gardeners, and more. We also host regular meetings featuring invasive species themed presentations from researchers, land managers, and other experts. We actually just had our spring meeting yesterday that was focused on invasive species research, and we featured someone who is doing research using drones to detect invasive species. And then we had someone who gave us a lot of information about current biocontrol options and where the research is with a lot of those. So you can also sign up for our monthly weed alerts and newsletters. So if you go to our homepage of our website, you can click subscribe for news and sign up, get on our emailing list. And then finally, we're always happy to answer your questions about invasive species. You can send us an email, info@blueridgeprism.org, or ask a question through our website, the Ask a Question on our homepage. And then lastly, some of my favorite resources for invasive species. So we have Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy. So Doug Tallamy really dives into native species, but he has some really good chapters on why invasive species are a problem for wildlife, birds, food webs, caterpillars, everything. So great read, easy to read, highly recommend Doug Tallamy's work to learn more about this issue. Plant Nova Natives has a great webpage on invasive plant management, especially for the homeowner, maybe in a suburban setting. And then the last 3 books, one of them is Plant Invaders of the Mid-Atlantic Natural Areas. That book is currently out of print, but it is available as a free download at the link I've provided here. And then the other 2 books have been published by the Forest Service, and one is a management guide to identification, and then the other one is its companion, it's a guide for invasive species management. Both of those are available from the Forest Service research station as a free download. You're welcome to reach out to me and I can forward you those links to access those resources. And all of those links are also on our website. So what is the second thing you can do? You can report occurrences of invasive species that have escaped cultivation. And you can easily do that using an app called Edmapps. And I'll take a minute to introduce you to Edmapps. So citizen conservationists like you are the eyes and ears on the ground to help detect new invasive species and track how invasive species spread across Virginia over time. This kind of information helps biologists and policymakers make informed decisions about how to effectively regulate and manage invasive species. It's as simple as downloading an app to your phone from the Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health, or Bugwood. A quality photo, along with answering some simple questions, is all it takes to contribute. If you're not sure about a plant, there's even a category called Unknown Plant, and an expert verifier will vet the record and help with identification before it is added to the database. Collecting invasive species occurrence information through this app is a really effective tool because of that expert verifier. So it makes the record, we know it's a positive identification, helping it make it a more scientifically sound resource for policymakers and biologists. And I'll just walk you through the app. This is what it looks like. When you download it, and you can open it up, you can use the menu, you can select the plant that you would like to report. And you can look at it, the common names, and it has the scientific names. And then for this example, I selected Calorie Pear. And if you select that plant, there's all kinds of details and images about that particular invasive plant to help you feel confident in reporting it. And again, there's an expert verifier that's going to double check it. So when you're ready to begin to complete the report, you hit report. That's on the upper right part of the Calorie Pear picture. You can see report, and then you complete the form. And when you've completed that form that's shown to the right of the screen, you can hit save, and it's done. Then I think you have to upload it too. And if you don't like using an app or a smartphone, if you prefer a desktop, go to edmapps.org to report your invasive species sightings. Pretty easy. So the third thing you can do to help deal with invasive species is to choose native plants for your landscape. And we're going to take a few minutes just to look at a few commonly invasive plant species that you should avoid when thinking about your home landscaping. And I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of invasive landscaping plants that are invasives, but we can only cover just a handful today. Okay, there we go. So first, we have got to stop these invasive plants at the source. And who is the source? It is us, the consumer. These invasives are readily available at stores like Home Depot and other box stores, Amazon, other online outlets like Etsy or eBay, and your local nursery and garden centers. I actually did a search a few weeks ago and found all of these invasive plants for sale. And apparently you can buy Calorie Pear seeds online at Amazon. I don't recommend that you do that, but it is an option. So there are many invasive plants being grown in Virginia. There are many plants that are for sale in Virginia, and there are many invasive plants that are widely used in landscaping in Virginia. The invasive plants that you are working to control could very well be the same species of plants that your neighbor will be planting this weekend. And you could make that same statement about the Shenandoah National Park. The same species that they are working to control in high quality natural areas in the park are the same plants that the park's neighbors might be planting this weekend. So half the solution for reducing the threat of invasive species is by reducing their demand. Let your local nursery know that if you see an invasive plant on their shelves, let them know in a kind, non-confrontational and educational way that you see this plant and that it is a problem for Virginia and for the park. Make sure to tell your local garden retailer that you want Virginia native plants. Their customer is you, and your feedback is very important. So now we're going to review several of these plants that you'll see at the box stores or your local garden center and consider some native alternatives best suited for landscaping purposes. The suggested native alternative should be appropriate for most parts of Virginia across the mountain, Piedmont, and coastal plain regions. And in this picture, there's English ivy. And so speaking of English ivy, we'll get started. English ivy is often selected for ground cover because it's perennial, hardy, and evergreen. When it escapes, it forms dense mats on the forest floor, displacing native plants. English ivy quickly climbs trees, and the weight of the vine can pull a tree down and make the tree vulnerable to damage during snow and ice events from the excess weight, as shown in the lower right photo. English ivy becomes reproductive when it goes vertical, producing berries that are often consumed by birds. The seedlings I'm holding in the upper right photo germinated after being deposited by birds hanging out in trees in my yard. So some native ground covers. There's a ton of native ground cover options. So some other invasive vines are winter creeper and vinca. So in addition to English ivy, they're all invasive. They're all popular for ground cover. So let's choose some native species for ground covers. So we have moss phlox, native sedges, Pennsylvania sedge being a great ground cover. Partridge berry has a sweet little white flower. It's evergreen and it has a bright red berry. We have wild geranium, which will be flowering soon. Foam flower, which is in flower right now. Beautiful white column of flowers. And pussy toes, one of my favorites. Some other options for native ground covers are ferns. Ferns are the unsung heroes in the native garden and the landscape. So some good options may be sensitive fern or Christmas fern, and Christmas fern is an evergreen fern. There's also wild ginger, golden ragwort. Virginia creeper is a perennial vine that can make a really nice ground cover as shown in the photo here. And then one of my personal favorites is a common blue violet. It's easy to grow and transplant. It's often treated as a weed, but it can be a wonderful ground cover when used in the right places. And I like to dig them and move them around and tuck them into the nooks and crannies of my garden for bright spring blue flowers that support a lot of our early pollinators. So we're going to go back to invasives in the landscaping to this invasive shrub. A popular landscaping shrub, burning bush, is prized for its brilliant fall red color, and it's planted everywhere. It has green flowers and winged twigs. It's shade tolerant, invading forest understories and forming dense thickets which outcompete and displace native plant species. It also threatens coastal scrublands and prairies. The reddish capsule split to reveal an orange flesh-covered seed. The birds unfortunately disperse these seeds. So what are some native alternatives for this shrub? So these native shrubs offer a wonderful fall color. We have arrowwood, that's yellow to reddish purple fall leaves. Maple leaf viburnum, it likes part sun to shade, and it has rosy pink fall leaves, white flowers. The common ninebark is a dull yellow to bronze fall leaves, and it has a red, bright to reddish brown fruit. In the photo here, we have a red chokeberry. It's salmon to scarlet purple fall leaves, white flower and red fruit. Stunning shrub. And then the winged sumac is a bright red fall color, and it has showy fruiting clusters that turn maroon brown. And all these are great shrubs for migrating birds in the fall. So moving on to invasive grasses that are often used in the landscape. This is one that you see in so many subdivisions and yards, and it's people just plant it out of habit, I think. But there are more than 50 ornamental forms of miscanthus that are sold in the United States horticultural trade. This invasive grass escapes forming infestations along roadsides, forest edges, right-of-ways, and other disturbed sites. And it's also a real threat to grassland natural communities. So what are some native alternatives? So miscanthus is often planted because of its strong vertical form and fall and winter interest in turning a straw color, and it has fluffy seed heads. These native grasses offer that strong vertical form and winter interest. So we have little blue stem, Indian grass, which is a clumping grass with tufted tall foliage, golden plumes, and then there's giant plume grass, and that's actually more appropriate for the Piedmont and coastal regions than the mountain region. And then I also have a shout out for purple lovegrass and muley grass. They're really good alternatives to another invasive grass called fountain grass. Purple lovegrass, it grows low to the ground, and it flowers in the late summer, featuring like really purplish clouds. It's lovely. And muley grass is a clumping grass with a rounded form and airy red plumes. So our last invasive that's commonly used in landscaping is Calorie Pear. And I have a feeling that this might be a problem at the national park. So you may also know this species as Bradford pear. This invasive tree species was flowering during late March and early April. It's easy to identify during that time. It's widely planted as a street and yard tree, and it readily escapes cultivation and overtakes fields and pops up in forests, often spread by birds. Driving along I-64 West during late March, I was reminded of how it pops up, seeing it all along the Interstate 64 right away. And I observed a lot of smaller trees in forested areas that were adjacent to yards and commercial spaces that had planted Calorie Pear as a landscaping tree. The area around Waynesboro is a real example of how the tree has spread out of cultivation. And you may have noticed it in your town too. So what are some good alternatives? So Calorie Pear is planted for early spring flowers, although those flowers smell terrible. Oh my gosh, they're terrible. And it is also a short tree, which makes it, that's a good quality for in a subdivision, along a right-of-way or in your backyard. But there are a lot of much better native alternatives. So we have Downy serviceberry, that gets 20 to 30 feet. Eastern redbud, that has pink flowers that are also very lovely. Those are 15 to 40 feet in height. We have the fringe tree, 10 to 25 feet in height. And then my favorite is the flowering dogwood, which is about 12 to 20 feet in height. And I think that this is kind of a workhorse of trees that we can use in our landscapings, because it offers showy early spring flowers that are pleasing to humans and bees alike. And then in the fall, it offers really bright red fruit to birds that are hungry and need to fuel up to continue their migration. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of other plants that we not even going to be able to touch on. So there's unfortunately so many of them, and that they're deliberately planted in our landscapes. So changes to the state law, in addition to changes in consumer plant choices, will be what turns the ship of invasive plant invasions in Virginia. Addressing the impacts of invasive plants is an essential part of stewarding your land, no matter how small. It's an ongoing part of land management, and it is a long-term investment. So start small, think big, talk to your neighbors. Remember, nature is all around us, and it is up to us to plant the things that birds, native bees, butterflies, caterpillars, and us humans need too. So remove your invasive plants, choose native plants when thinking about your landscape. You can absolutely and make a difference. Thank you.
Wow, Pat, Jake, thank you. So Beth, I'm sorry. Beth, Pat, Jake, thank you. Let me get all your names straight here. That was a very informative session. I learned a whole lot, particularly as being the new executive director here at the Trust. I thank you guys for your time. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists?
No questions at this point, Jessica.
Okay, well, then we will wrap it up and say thank you guys all for joining us for this lunchtime virtual field trip. We hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope you enjoyed it. You can learn more about this program and all the other programs that the Trust is involved in at Shenandoah National Park Trust.org, and you can also visit the blueridgeprism.org, and they are posted in the chat box. So happy Earth Day and happy rest of the National Park Week.